Welcome everyone to the Stockbridge Library, Museum and Archives online poetry series. We are in year 3. Our theme this year is inquiry and the power of poetry in asking and answering questions. And I might add, in contemplating the big questions that we all grapple with. I want to start by thanking John Gillespie, who started this series and keeps it running for us, and finds poets week after week who are willing to share their work with us. John, thank you so much. And I'm also happy to welcome the Virginia Women's Poetry Collective this week, who will be sharing some of their work on this Valentine's Day. Perhaps the topic of love will come up, but I will leave that to our poets to decide. We have with us today Kim Ports Parsons. Her debut collection is Mayapple Forest, forthcoming from Terrapin Books. We have April J. Asbury, and she teaches writing and literature at Radford University, and her work can be found in Artemis Still, the Journal, the Anthology of Appalachian Writers, and some other publications. We also have Angie Clevinger, and she's been published in many educational publications, and her first poetry collection with a great title, The Lady of the Lake, had bouffant hair, will be coming out this coming fall. And lastly, we have Cathy Hailey with us, and she also teaches in a writing program, and she's the Northern Region Vice President of the Poetry Society of Virginia. And her chapbook, I'd Rather Be a Hyacinth, will be coming out this year. Welcome to all of you. John, thank you. And I will turn the program over to all of you.
Yeah, Wendy, thank you and the library for hosting the program, and for Tess when she helps out. So yeah, this is reading number 102. And I think when we started almost 3 years ago, I thought we were going to do like 3 or 4 and then pack it up. So Perry, you can't, once you let poetry out of the box, you can't kill it. You can't get a Pandora's box. You can't get it back in. What was I reading? Before I start, I just want to tell you in Brunswick, Maine, where Henry Wadsworth Longfellow was a professor and lived here, they have a Longfellow Poetry Month. So they must have 6 poetry readings, and this company called Sight and Sound did a biopic movie of him starting in 1861, which I went to Saturday at local theaters, almost 2 hours long, but unbelievable. Just an unbelievable personal story of, his second wife died tragically and had 5 kids, and one went to the Civil War, and just all sorts of, this is fantastic. So I said, once poetry comes out of the box, man, you cannot put it back in. That's it. So after my little speech there, let's start out. And I think, April, Kim, and Angela, Cathy, and I have talked quite a bit. We're going to do kind of a round robin. And the first thing we want to know, and April, I think you're in the, the Hollywood Squares top square to the left. So we'll go with you first.
Okay.
We want to find out, what does inquiry mean to you?
Digging deeper into everything. Yeah. I love reading all kinds of random facts, doing like the Wikipedia crawl through the internet, through constantly reading. I feel as if that is actually a really good trait for a lot of writers to have, is to take deep, passionate plunges into things, even if they don't immediately seem useful. Sometimes I'll go through periods where I'm researching the Ramones, serial killers, folk tales, history of my local town. I mean, all of those things. And while they don't seem to directly lead to poetry, it gives me this wealth that I can draw from, sometimes in really unexpected ways. And sometimes if I start with a detail that I've picked up that way, if I just keep going deeper, then that's where I find the power of poetry.
Nice. So
Thank
Kim,
you.
let's move to you as number 2. What's inquiry mean to you?
Yeah, I feel everything she just said, April said, really resounds with me. I am a pondering, questioning, researching, exploring, reading, reflecting, probing further, looking for connections kind of person. All the time. Just all the time.
I think there's a poem. I think there's a poem in there somewhere.
Could be. And then, that wonderful thing that happens if you sort of enjoy that process is the more you learn, the more questions you have, and the more you want to make connections or turn it around and look at it from another angle, or think about the history of it, or explore how different art forms, express that thing. So I was the kind of student in college and in graduate school who would get excited about the catalog of classes coming out, and I'd read it like it was like I was going to a candy shop, this idea of like, what could I learn next? And I think writing poetry is just a natural extension of that for me. Obviously not for everyone, but the writing of poetry for me is a kind of digging in and searching around and asking questions. And the process, I don't always get the answer, but I think the writing of poetry helps me, think about possible answers, at least for a particular moment or perspective.
Okay. Now, Angela, you have to come up with something brand new about inquiry.
Well, I come at poetry through a way of dealing with trauma. And when you're a person who has experienced a lot of trauma, you ask yourself a lot of things like, why? Why did this happen to me? Was I supposed to learn from this? Is it fair? Those are all the kinds of questions that you spend thousands of dollars asking a therapist. When the money runs out and you
write
can't see
poetry.
you write poetry.
I think we have a new business here. Terry, we'll do 2 psych sessions and then we'll do like some poetry prompts.
Exactly. But that is where I have come from. All of my poetry starts with questioning, and sometimes I question the big things, like what happened, what was going on before I was born. And I even write about that I chose these parents, and then I think to myself in therapy, why? Why did I choose them? And digging into that realm, which is there's lots of literature on what happens to us before we are born and after we die. I've always been fascinated with that. One of the best poems I wrote was, why is it when I am upset and feeling very anxious, taking a bath helps? Like just soaking in hot water. And then when I was in the hot water, it brought back a memory that I'd had, and I wrote a poem about it. And then I had that answer. So that's how and I guess as the joke, when the money runs out, you write poetry, because you can't be in therapy your whole life. I guess you can, but not on a teacher's salary, not on a public school teacher's salary.
Right.
So I write poetry. So that's something different.
Yeah, I think that'll be season 4. Poetry therapy in 4 easy lessons. Cathy, I'm liking this already. We're planting it. Wendy's writing this down, I'm sure, or basically ignoring us, one or the other. So Cathy, what does inquiry mean to you?
Yeah, I just like to say that I share bathtub inspiration with you, Andrew. It's kind of like taking a walk for some people, or just when you give up on trying so hard, and you do something to relax, that's when the ideas start floating into your head. I don't know if that relates to inquiry or not, but I think it does, because we're constantly asking the questions, but we're not always finding the answers easily. But if they're planted in our brains, then no matter what we're doing in our lives, thoughts of that question might come back to us. And sometimes that's the key to getting the poem started if it hasn't started yet, or the key to ending the poem, or something like that. But I also share that idea of the questions, just gathering more questions, that there's an infinite number. And sometimes I write to a lot of questions, like I'm not feeling like I'm asking questions when I start writing. I might start with an image or something, but by the end of what I'm writing, it's a series of questions. And I don't really try to answer them, but it's the impetus to start questioning that comes through the poem. But I'm also moved to inquiry by things that haunt me, both in the personal experience sense that Angie mentioned, but also like things that are happening around me. Just, I can't believe this is happening again. Like last night with the Michigan State University shooting, it's things like that. And some things I choose to explore in more depth, and some things I don't, because I don't think any of us could explore in depth all the tragedies that are happening around us these days.
Yeah, that's great. So I want to launch off what Cathy said. And this is what we're going to do in kind of round two. Is I want you, April, we'll start with you again. So, when you're in your writing style, are you starting with a question, or are you letting, the bathtub inspiration arrive, where a question may emerge in your poetry? And then maybe read us, a poem or two that you've picked out. So go ahead.
Usually I don't necessarily start from a question, but from something I know or think that I knew. And then once I start really digging into it, then what happens is I end up uncovering a lot more along the way. But the first one I'm going to read was actually a poem that came out of some of all of that reading that I'd done. When I was in high school, I tried to read an encyclopedia of helpful plants and herbs. I think I made it about as far as chicory before I gave up on that one. But
Oh boy.
one of the things that always stuck with me was a story, and I figure it's probably apocryphal, but who knows, about an old man who ate a cup full of apple seeds. And of course, if you eat the apple seeds, if you eat too many of them, they're poisonous. They create like a cyanide. It would take a lot of apple seeds though, wouldn't it? Like, what happened with that guy? What was going through his head? How did he get so many? And then that leads me to thinking about other people with their food being equated to wisdom.
Yeah.
And Augustus Engelhart was a real person. He was a man who tried to start his own coconut cult, where people ate nothing but coconuts. Yeah. Sure.
Now this isn't just in Virginia, is it?
Oh God, no.
Okay, good. I have friends there, but I'd never be able to visit again if it was just a coconut place.
Just coconuts. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he had symbolism and everything. So it was that bank of stuff that I'd sort of built up over the years.
Yep.
Once I started digging, and I got to this poem, which is in my book Woman with Crows, and it's called Gluttonies. An apple a day keeps the doctor away. So what might the apple seeds do? The old man vowed to eat a spoonful a day, the hard black shells of health and strength and stolen knowledge ground to paste by his restless teeth. masticated treasure slid in a bitter marzipan mush down his greedy throat. He died, of course. At least it was fast. Faster than Englehart, tropical prophet of the coconut cult. That August Messiah split from his clothes and found food of the gods, clear water nectar, ambrosial white flesh, a sacred host bound in hairy shells like wise heads stuffed with radiance. He supped with the sun until his teeth fell out, his lush hair thinned, his wiry legs bloomed with ulcers. The truth is, you don't need Eve's fruit. Eat seeds or rhubarb, gulp cabbage soup, gnaw lamb and pineapple or eggs and wine, gorge on the sacred host, or swallow only air. You can starve to death in paradise, wisdom sweet in your toothless mouth.
Oh boy. Yeah, that was a.
Yeah,
I think you should have stayed with chicory. I think that was the message of that poem. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I got to apples before chicory.
Yeah, that's it. That's
They
it.
went alphabetically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can talk about clover too. I come to think of it, I might made it a little farther. I have another one here called Big Kid Legends. And this one was inspired by all of the stories I remember hearing about the McDonald's playgrounds.
Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, Jack just came in and the dogs went bananas, but I think we'll be okay. But yeah, I was thinking about those stories that you tell as kids. And in this case, I ended up actually having to go back and do some research, because when I started thinking about the McDonald's playgrounds of my youth, I started wondering if I didn't actually hallucinate them. But yeah, Big Kid Legends. Somebody knew somebody who broke a something on McDonald's playground. Grimace was the usual culprit. His blobby idiot grin bloomed from a bouncy cage on massive metal springs. You crawled inside while he bumped and swayed until somebody slipped and something went bang right on the concrete floor. Concrete? Oh, yes. This isn't the playland of squishy rubber balls, kitty shoes lined safe in plastic cubbies. Our rides were glazed metal and sun-scorched steel. Leering hamburglers, silver slide, the tower jail, and the seedy Big Mac pop, all bolted down under thin green turf that scraped back skin and didn't save Whitney's brother's right arm from hitting snap, 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 broke in 3 places while the blood gushed out. I heard, we all heard, about the busted up brothers, the bodies flung from the carousel of Mayor McCheese, the spring-loaded hamburger horsey snap right into the snotty nose of a squalling toddler. Sure, maybe us big kids never found needles in the ball pit or snakes slithered in the cubbies with their flip-flops, but we knew a busted arm was more danger than a razor blade apple or a spooky bridge or even Bloody Mary in your bathroom mirror at home.
All right. I'm not going to eat in Virginia again. That's it. Very good. Kim, let's hear your take on, do you start with a question or do you let the questions kind of bubble up and then read us a couple poems?
Okay. I think the answer is yes to both of those things. And sometimes even beginning with the question and discovering it wasn't the question at all, it was another question altogether. Because the process of writing really does lead me new places that I didn't know I was going to go. sometimes the motivation for writing the poem is that I'm asking myself a question: how in the world can I write about this? How in the world can I write about this? I'm thinking of what Cathy brought up, and the just dreadful, dreadful onslaught of gun violence. This past summer, after Uvalde, I just went around feeling sick, for days, and asking myself, how can I write about gun violence? And I found myself answering myself, in my head, saying, I can't write a poem with a gun. I can't write a poem with a gun. And so I'm going to read that poem for you. The title is I Can't Write a Poem with a Gun. I can't pick berries with a gun, can't protect my fingers from thorns, or carry the fruit back, or stir in sugar and spice. I can't mix pastry with a gun, or roll it out, or bake it, or lift its sweetness to your tongue. I can't plant seeds with a gun, can't measure the furrow, or lay each one in its inch of ground. I can't hoe any rows with a gun, or lug the weeds to the compost heap, or turn the steaming piles, or sift the new soil, or spread it around the tender shoots. I can't chop fresh greens with a gun, can't slice onions or grate garlic, or soak dried red beans, or stir the pot. I can't set the table with a gun, or arrange flowers, or light a candle, or blow out the smoking match, or pull out your chair. A gun won't help me to listen to your story, to see the falling images as words ricochet around us. A gun won't open my heart to your pain, or help me to extinguish it, or place my hand on your quaking shoulder, or wash away any blood. I can't make a soft bed with a gun, or tuck a gun around me for warmth, or wrap my arms around my beloved, or kiss a cheek, or stroke the cat, or stretch when I wake, or smell the morning. I can't brew coffee with a gun, or tie the stiff laces of my muddy boots. When a fox steps lightly into the yard and shakes off the dew from the meadow and cocks her head, nose quivering, a gun will not help me to study her, how she seems to consider so intently which way to turn, how so much might depend upon her choice. Where to next in this fraught, this tantalizing world?
Wow, very nice.
I continue to ask myself that question: how do we write about these things? I'm not sure that poetry would say, go straight at it, though sometimes that works. And the process of writing, it feels like a kind of inquiry in itself. I didn't know when I started working on that where it was going to go. And other times what happens is something in my writing process is that my mind just hooks on to something, and I'm feeling really drawn to it. And my book came out in October. Let's see if I can get that in the.
And it doesn't.
Doesn't do too well, but it's the Mayapple Forest, and the image of the Mayapple.
Oh, yeah, okay.
The image of the Mayapple was just really compelling to me. So I did what I always do. I went and read about mayaples. I looked at images of mayaples. I went on hikes looking for mayaples. I went out to the patch of mayaples in the woods near my house, got down close to the ground and looked at them up close. I wrote about them. I thought about them. They were compelling me. And I ended up writing a few poems that contain that image that anchor the book. And one of the poems is about mayapple jelly. And I'll say this native plant, who in the world ever decided to create the first recipe from this fruit? The entire plant is poisonous, except the singular fruit, when it is perfectly ripe, can be used to create juice or jam or jelly or candy, you know, to as a flavoring. And so you read online, you know, these amazing people who are foragers and who create recipes from foraged food. And so I did a little research about that. And then, so I'm going to read this poem, which is called Mayapple Jelly. And I'll say one other thing about inquiry. Sometimes asking yourself to use a form, a traditional form, is a kind of inquiry, because you ask yourself, well, how will I come up with that repeating line? Or how will I rhyme when I'm trying to write about this? Or how will I fit that syllabic count or that formal requirement, whatever it might be? So this is a pantoum, which requires repetition. And it asked me to kind of go back into the imagery over and over again until I discovered what it is I wanted to say. Mayapple jelly. Despite the name, there's no fruit in May. It ripens mellow and rare under July's ragged umbrella. You need 2 cups, pectin, sugar, and lemon. Stir the honey guava, simmering yellow. Strain away the poison of the pulp, seeds, and skin. Taste the singular fruit, sweet and sour, thickened by pectin. Consider its names: raccoonberry, ground apple, wild mandrake. Strain life's poisons. It's finished when you skim a spoon and 2 distinct drops run together, sheeting from a plate. Consider ways to name the pain. Heart's mandrake? Label and shelve. Some days, small spoonfuls are cathartic. When a life drops, edges scrape like tectonic plates. Mayapple roots grow underground in winter. Their poison, cytostatic, meaning cells that won't divide. Shelve your losses. Taste spoonfuls in remembrance. Wait for the sweetness. Memory's calf. Mothers may teach daughters how to smooth edges, how to placate pain, how to keen a song of naming, how loss ripens the self.
Very
So
nice.
I didn't realize that writing about the mayapple would help me to express the process of learning how to accept grief and loss, you know, in this case of a daughter I was not able to bring to terms. And so it's really interesting where inquiry will lead you in the writing process.
No, great. No, thank you for sharing. Angela,
Yes.
you're going to talk about if, you started the whole bathtub inspiration thing. So maybe that's where we're just wondering, is it all coming from the bathtub? Does the bathtub have like claw feet, or is it, we probably have to
Well,
have
the
more about
original bathtub had claw feet, but I start with inquiry because I'm always asking why. Um, and just like Kim talked about, sometimes the question of why, you start out and you think this is going to be a poem about this, and then it ends up being a poem about something else.
Yeah.
So the word choices for me, especially in I'll just call it the bathtub poem, but the questions for me and this group helped me is that it's a very raw experience, and I was trying to be a little more proper than I need it to be. And I remember getting feedback from the collective saying, no, you need to say it just like it needs to be said. This is a poem that has punch and it has meaning. So go ahead and don't shy away from using a word that you need to use, even if it slightly puts somebody off, because that is what's needed to convey the meaning. So I would say, even in the process of writing the poem, if you know exactly what you want to do, you can mess with form, ask about word choice, pay attention to those syllables. I think that a good poet, not that I would profess to be, but poets that have all of those skills to manipulate those words to get them to say what they want to say, comes from a place of inquiry. I'll go ahead and read Granny's baptismal tub. I sat among a kaleidoscope of soap shards floating atop skittered water. Granny had made me pre-wash in the sink. Shit permeated from the washroom, wafting from my jeans and panties. Dad's drunk friend had been at the house. Dad and he drinking dragons in the basement, me dancing, dreaming star-searched dreams. Venomous mad dog breath saturated the basement. Dad's friend asked me to sit on his lap. Dad was there, surely. It was innocent. But that dad dragon was nearly passed out in drunken indolence. Dad was the red dragon, blood vessels making angry tributaries on his blushed nose. His friend was the blue dragon driving a vintage blue Chevelle, a car admired and well known in town. Blue dragon's hands glided up innocent thighs towards virginal fortunes. All dragons seek treasure. Even at 11, I knew the blue dragon was moving up a private road, ignoring the trespassing sign. I twisted and turned, nimbly escaping Blue's talony grasp, then zoomed up the stairs, out the door, into the street lamp night. It was then that teary yelps bubbled up from my gut, running my bare feet across dew-drenched grass, then sharp driveway rocks my bowels dropped. I exploded, entered into a river of shame. 2 years ago, my woman's blood had come. I was too old to have this kind of accident. I knocked on Granny's door, gasping for air. I was drowning in shit, blood, and tears. Granny answers. Her long gray hair tied in rag curlers bounced as she hobbled on her wooden leg. I am saved. I sat in the claw-footed tub. Soap shards danced atop the water, and I told Granny the tale of two dragons, the red and the blue. She harumphed as she scrubbed me white as snow.
Wow. Amazing. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
I'll try to end on something a little more lighthearted. That was rough. We'll try to do something a little better. Of course, the poem's title doesn't seem to redeem us too much. It's called When I Die.
Oh boy.
So
Oh boy.
when I die. When I die, I hope there are men wearing bibs who gather around a rusted old pickup truck and pass around a jar of moonshine with their calloused hands and share stories about some dirty joke I told or how I rocked their world one summer night with my expert lovin'. When I'm Don't laugh. That could happen. When I'm I'm laid out for visiting hours, I hope the sassy women in my family wear their finest. I hope their skirts are a little too short and a little too tight to be considered proper. I hope their lips are harlot red and their hair is bleach bottle blonde and teased high. I hope they smell of Marlboros and Gina Tay. When my old high school friends read of my passing, I hope a few of them remember the time that crazy pregnant lady stood up on a table and cussed me out. I hope they tell their kids or spouse about me asking Coach if he was wearing a hairpiece or a lot of hairspray. When my ex-boyfriends read of my passing, I hope they remember how I smelled of vanilla musk and my lips tasted of cherry lip balm and they ask themselves, what if? When I'm cremated after all the public displays, I hope my teacher friends will talk about the protests and letters I did to gain support for public education. I hope they will talk about my wisdom and knowledge. I hope one of them will say that my sacrifices made a difference in students' lives. I hope they put a bench under a tree near a playground with my name on it so they can relax while watching their class play. When my girlfriends hear about my cause of death, I hope they share their nerve pills with each other and talk about the last time they saw me and how I was cutting up as usual. I hope they say I had a sweet nature and that I mostly did what was right for others. I want the bitches that I know to curse my name. I hope they attend my funeral to make sure I am truly dead. I want them to I want them to feel happiness that they will never have to see me again. Then I hope they experience such vile bad luck that they find Jesus because they are convinced I'm haunting them from the beyond. Years after I'm gone, and but a whisper of sporadic thought, I hope my daughters will know how proud I am of them. I hope they're not too hard on themselves and that they have the courage to stand up for their convictions. I hope that occasionally one of my former students will reach out to them and say, Mrs. Clevinger helped me. I hope my husband buys me flowers, orangish peach roses, for every year we were together. After my body is devoid of breath and a proper amount of time has passed, I hope he finds him a woman to marry, a woman quieter, slightly bigger, and a little less pretty than me. I want him to remember me with fondness. Mostly, I want him happy for the rest of his days. In the years I lived, I was many things to many people. I hope all those in attendance mingle at my wake and discover who I was, all the many facets of who I was. But most of all, I hope the few who knew all of me and loved me anyway comfort.
Wow. Cathy, make a note. If Angela does pass the next 10 years, let me know because I'm going to sell tickets to the funeral. I think there's a money-making opportunity here. No, that's incredible. That's incredible. I'm thinking like, let's say, oh, maybe I should do some orchestration right now. I'm almost 73. Maybe I should do some Barnum and Bailey planning for my exit. I loved it, Angela. I love it.
Thank you.
Oh, fantastic. Cathy, I don't know how you top this. This is, I don't know. We got.
No, I'm not even trying. I'm gonna read a couple of really short poems from my book, I'd Rather Be a Hyacinth, which actually just came out a couple weeks ago. So
Nice.
I'm gonna start with a poem titled Flying High, and I'll talk about it after I read it.
Yeah.
The questions are direct in it. Flying high. Yellow pigments fade as our rose opens wider till petals cascade. Rainstorm denied her a lifeline earned and deserved. Gerbera daisies, magenta preserved, stand tall like charming ladies in crowds of proud leaves. How does God decide which flower stays, which recedes? Mother Nature's chide? Darwin's law does not apply. She lived as a butterfly. So this is a poem where the questions came along in the writing process. After I retired in 2019, and then we were faced with the pandemic, I started spending a lot of time sitting out in nature, looking carefully, observing in a way that I didn't have time to while I taught for 40 years. So I would start a lot of poetry or I would just be writing, describing the flowers, the birds, the things that were surrounding me in nature. This particular poem, though, as I started to, note things that were specific about the different flowers, this question about, how does God decide which flower stays, which recedes, was suddenly about my daughter, who we'd lost in a car accident in 2018. So I didn't sit down to write about her. I didn't many times when I was writing, but a lot of times she appeared in the poems. And in this one, it's sort of asking the question I think every mother asks if she loses a child, because you don't plan for that. You don't expect that. You plan to be the one to go first. So I'm going really serious after the humorous poem, but still, in the theme of death, I guess. But it's just the way it's the way it happened. I mean, I'm sure there were plenty of versions of this poem along the way before those questions gelled. But once I found them, I felt like they were the way that poem needed to end. And this poem is a very short poem. It's sonnet length. It's a haiku sonnet, which is an unusual form that I learned from Tom Hunley in the Poetry Gymnasium, his book of prompts. And for some reason, I got excited about trying it and started doing it regularly. And so it has that turn like a sonnet, but it uses the Shakespearean sonnet rhyme scheme, A, B, C, D, etc. But the stanzas are haiku. The final one has an added couplet, which you can call it a tanka together if you prefer to go that way. So that leads me to the second poem, which really is answering a question that I kept asking myself, which is, why am I writing in this form? Or why am I turning to form after my natural poetry writing tends to be a lot more scrawling, narrative, prosy poetry? And it also sort of was answering a question that I had. How does someone who writes free verse poetry most of her life decide to publish her first chapbook with poetry that's all in a single form? It just didn't make sense in some ways, but the reason it initially made sense to me is that I could put these all together without struggling over which poems to put together in a collection. And initially, I didn't work that hard at ordering them until I met the Virginia Women's Poetry Collective. And through our discussion of manuscripts, it really challenged me to rethink the way that I was ordering the poetry. And it changed the book in a really positive way. So I want to thank you all for that. And I'd like to thank Angela Dribbin too, who was the initiator of our group. But this is the poem that's about writing poetry that sort of answers those questions, but not definitively. In closing, and I've put it in the afterword of the book, to curb long-winded verse, haiku sonnet, excess rescinded, villanelle, sonnet, iambic pentameter, counting tens and fives, or a repeater, color coding special lines, tercets to quatrain. Limits help us grow when we push beyond brain strain, writing poems that glow. There's magic in condensing, precision in expressing. So I came to a conclusion of sorts. But now I have a book and it's all haiku sonnets. I just don't want people to think that I don't write anything else.
Nice, nice. Cathy, that's great. So tell us, share with us about the woman's Virginia Women's Poetry Collective and kind of what you do and how you do things as a group.
Yes. Well, Angela Driven emailed us. I'm not sure how she made the selection of turning to the four of us, but she emailed us and said that she'd been looking at other places that had these groups called collectives, usually women's collectives, and that she thought it was about time that we started one in Virginia. Would we be interested in participating? And we all, of course, said yes. And I mean, this is just one example of the many generous things that Angela has done as vice president of her Western region of the Poetry Society of Virginia. She is such a loving person, and she thrives in reaching out to others. Yes, she wants to participate in this because she also wanted to, grow as a poet. But I feel like we all grew so much because of her initiative. We started out just meeting when somebody had a manuscript to sort of the start of a manuscript or a manuscript in progress along the way. We're always questioning when we're in that stage. I don't know any poet who's been anything but questioning. So the inquiry goes here too, because in putting together collections, it's so difficult to decide which poems are going to go in. I tried to solve that by choosing haiku sonnets, but still there's the which poems are talking to each other, how does the book change if the arc is different because of the poems at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end. So that's how we did that. I was the last of the group to participate with a different manuscript because my manuscript had been accepted already, but I still grew in this group because though it was accepted, I'd completely transformed it, even though most of the poems were there to start with. I think, I don't know if you want to hear from anybody else, but I think we can all say that we gained a lot from not just the encouragement we gave each other, but also from the challenges that we presented to each other. Because sometimes you have to have somebody say, it's not perfect yet, in order to make yourself do the hard work. And so I feel like we all did hard work after meeting with each other. And then once we'd each shared a manuscript, we decided to transition into more of an individual poem critique group. And we've just started on that process, but we'll meet again next week with one or two poems each to give feedback to each other in a different kind of process.
So do any two of you write a poem jointly? Have two points of view? I've heard that for some other, we have kind of I don't know what you would call it, a man and his significant other, or a woman and her significant other. So we have a male-female duo that are presenting later in the year. And I'm just wondering how these collaborations, is it all just solo or, I mean, obviously, everyone's going to Angela's funeral, so there's no room for any other collaboration. But wait, the refreshment stand. There's going to be hard liquor at the refreshment stand. So but I mean, I just didn't know if that was something that, have two voices kind of echo in a poem. I don't know, just something that came to mind. I don't know if it makes sense or not.
I love the idea. We haven't done that yet, but I did hear about a lot of people turning to that kind of collaboration during the pandemic because they weren't seeing each other, but they were able to write to each other. And sometimes the writing turned into poems, and before long they had something creative, that they turned out together by writing poetically.
I was going to say that April and I have worked and done back and forth poems, or she works on this. It's usually a kind of a mirror thing where she's writing on this side and I'll write something on the other side. We have not ventured into publishing any of those. Those are just kind of, and they happen on the telephone. And I
Yeah.
think it happens out of a need to get together and write. She had to leave and go all the way to Alabama. I haven't gotten through that yet, her leaving to go to Alabama, or I'd have a poem about that, but I haven't worked through it yet. But that was something that we used to spend a lot of time doing when she was here.
Well, and of the group, including Angela Dribbin, Angie and April are the two that know each other the best. I haven't met any of these ladies, including Angela Dribbin. Kim, have you?
Yes. Yes, I've gotten to meet April, Angie C, and Angela Dribbin. And
Okay.
it's delightful. And I was going to add this little snippet. We may not have been writing collaboratively on individual poems, but I think that each time you collaborate and are in community with another poet, it teaches you and influences you and stretches you if you're open to it, which I think all of us are. And it's a wonderful thing, just like reading a great book of poetry by contemporary or reading Shakespearean sonnets. I think, reading poetry by others influences and changes your writing. Maybe not right away, but eventually, it becomes part of that pool of things you're drawing on. So I'd say in that sense, it's been important community for me as well.
I agree with that. And I'll say that the Stockbridge readings do that for me as well.
So April just shared that she and Angie went to high school together. So I think, we need some high school yearbook video excerpts or something. We need some, listen, you guys have so much material to work with. Come on. April, remember Angie in, 1976. Listen, you could write a whole Angie book. Maybe that wasn't that much. Maybe she wasn't wild back then. Maybe it was a lot tamer. So yeah. Look at April going, I don't think so.
Well, I was going to say we would have been a little bit young.
A little bit young. It's
Been
76.
born in 1976, honey.
Yeah.
Well, Angela, you started off early. I can tell you're an achiever. You started off really early.
You were close to my high school graduation, John. Mine is
Yeah.
75.
But I'm an
Yeah,
old soul.
Well, Perry, I graduated in 68. What year did you graduate?
High school?
High school, yeah.
71.
71, yeah.
So I
93.
got you beat.
Yeah, every time I left a junior high or high school, they built a new school. So I don't know if that said something about me, that I messed it up so bad that they had to tear it down and build something new. So
I want to do a quick plug for Cathy's book. I do have it right here. It's a wonderful book. So
yeah.
go and buy it. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And,
That's
and I don't have time to say all these things that I wrote down, ladies, but it was really, really enjoyable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we only have a kind of 2 or 3 minutes left. So I didn't, Angie, I mean, could you share a one-liner with us, or is it going to be a whole, trilogy of stories? Maybe there's one line you want to leave us with, something to think about, or something could be anything. It just doesn't have to be a poem. I mean, I love that, how does God decide? That could be an encyclopedia itself about, No, anybody, if the thoughts to share. before-
Angela's poem reminded me of Cher in Moonstruck. When
Yeah.
she says, I hope you drop dead and I'll come to your funeral in a red dress.
Yes.
Oh, boy.
Oh, I think a really good way to sum it up is that poetry begins with a questioning mind.
That's great. That's great.
I
Uh,
agree. And
Kim?
try to let go of predetermined ideas and be open and let yourself play and discover and make leaps.
Well, like Kim said really well, the question, after a while, sometimes the question wasn't the question at all and becomes something else. Then I have to sit down with mine and say, no, what's this poem really about? I know what it started out being, but what is it about now?
Mhm.
So I think you said it well.
Thank you.
April,
I'd
any
like to-
last thoughts?
Well,
Just to continue building those stores of all of those weird facts and wonderful stories and great memories. Because while it might not be immediately useful as to what kind of uses you can put apples or chicory or whatever to, that's your store. That's your store to draw from later.
Cathy, want to close us out with any final thoughts?
Sure, and just don't try to find the answer too quickly, because I think it's important to not just make a conclusion, draw a conclusion when you don't really know that that's the way to end.
Teresa, what were you
and-
going to say?
oh, thanks, Barry. I just wanted to thank
I'm
the
just
collective.
I'm just going to
Oh,
burst in there. Because we got all Virginia and all Buffalo.
Yeah.
I-
Oh, Virginia, not Buffalo. Yeah, well, we have
Except for
Wendy
you.
in
You
an
too.
unknown, Wendy's in witness protection now, so we can't disclose where she is.
In the
She's,
dark, in the dark.
Yeah,
room.
that's it. She's in Columbus, Ohio. No, I'm kidding.
Well, I
Uh,
did want to
Mass,
say
of
something.
course. So
Yeah.
I just want to thank all of you. Our time is up today. Virginia Women's Poetry Collective, you're amazing. Thank you for sharing your work with us. A recording of today's session will be available, and I hope to see you all next week for more poetry.